Okay, so I'm from an organisation called GÉANT. You may not know of us, it's highly likely that you don't. We're an association of the 41 research networks within Europe. We actually only formed on the 7th of October 2014, but we're celebrating our 30th birthday because we evolved from various organisations over time. In fact, we used to be called, or at least the organisation I used to work for was called Terrainer. You would also not know of us. But from Terrainer, we created two organisations, one called the RIPE NCC. They're responsible for allocating IP addresses in Europe. They have a peer called AFRINIC in Africa. And we created an organisation called the Operational Unit, which became later known as Dante. And then we were brought back together after... well, we came back together with Dante, not with the RIPE NCC. They still stand alone. So the thing that we're presumably most famous for is that we have a network, also called GÉANT. And this spans and connects large other regional networks around the planet. So predominantly in Europe, but we also, we reach out to the cluster of networks that are being built in Africa, as well as in the TAIN project in Southeast Asia, or all of Asia, CAREN in Central Asia, Clara, the Red Clara network in Latin America, and CARIBNet within the Caribbean. And we have some various projects with Internet 2 and ESNet, and have some high-speed networking into the United States for various science projects. And so while people were talking about bandwidth requirements and the bandwidth requirements of getting access to content, this is rather trivial in comparison with, I think we now have 400 gigabits a second of capacity across the Atlantic for the science experiments that go on with CERN and with the ESNet. The big infrastructure that's being built at the moment is the square kilometre array, which will be built in both Africa and in Australia and New Zealand. And this service, once it ramps up, will apparently produce as much data every single day as the LHC will ever produce. So these huge collectors are creating, massive amounts of data. In fact, Tenet in South Africa have some of the cables in place now, and they don't have a square kilometre rate to connect them to. So they're actually doing some sort of pilot projects on what are we going to do with all of this spare capacity that we currently have that will obviously reduce over time. So there's bandwidth available to at least some parts of Africa real soon now. Okay, so this is me. You'll see that my bio is rather succinct. I don't do a lot. The work I do is ensure that great things happen in lots of various countries around the planet. So I just sort of wrangle individual sort of national efforts in this space. So Australian, if you haven't worked out from my accent, I live and work in the Netherlands. Well, actually I live there, but I work pretty much everywhere else on the planet. I look after some federated services, so you may know of some of the things that we do. Eduroam and Edugain are the federated services that I look after. If you know of anything we do, you'll probably know of Eduroam. If you're from a university background, you may use it, you may enjoy it as you wander around Oxford. And this is a service that's currently exists in these countries. But the dark blue colouring is where we have a pilot, a production service of Eduroam. So we actually have a roaming operator, often situated with an NREN or within a leading university, and we have a few campuses that are using the Eduroam service and exploiting it. Where we have pilots, the light blue colour, which you can probably just see, is where we've started some work, and so you can see in Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, we've got some work happening in West Africa where we've got some initial sort of initial work with a leading campus or an emerging NREN to try and get Eduroam supported. Actually, no, this map, as always, this is the official map. Senegal now has Eduroam in deployment. And so we often do this as an initial easy to deploy service. It's got nothing to do with accessing publishing content. It's just got access to the network. All Eduroam does is give you access to the network. But it's a great way of starting off the building of community within a new territory, because you have to get universities willing to give up some of their precious bandwidth for visitors that will come along. And they always have this magic fear that if they're in a great location, that they'll have hordes of students from other campuses come to them to soak up all of their bandwidth. We've not seen this happen in practice. If it did ever happen, it's a great recruitment tool if you're situated in such a wonderful location. But clearly, I don't know if there's an Eduroam City Wi-Fi service in Oxford. I know it's in a huge number of the university buildings, but in Cambridge there's a city-wide Eduroam service, and they see 800 unique people from around the world turn up to their city using Eduroam, sort of every month, and that's great for them. That mobility of researchers coming, it sort of shows that there is research happening, because you don't always know what's happening on your campus. You don't know about the visiting professors all of the time. And actually we were doing the rollout in Ghana when we were doing that. It's being led by the University of Ghana, and it turned out that they had 2 German researchers on campus. So when they actually got Eduroam working, they noticed in their logs 2 iPhones of German researchers that happened to be on campus connected to Eduroam, and they were going, hey, we didn't even know they were here. And so this is the utility that we want to bring, at least for those that have the advantages of physical mobility of going somewhere. So Australian passport, not always particularly useful. We're hoping that Eduroam will be more useful than an Australian passport. I'm very much looking forward to the referendum on UK leaving the Commonwealth. I presume there'll be some supporters in favour of that also. So Australian passport doesn't particularly get you into a Commonwealth country particularly easy, but the idea of Eduroam having this utility that you can go somewhere, you're connected to the network, it's a Wi-Fi service, it's secured, it goes back to your home institution, and it starts off the building of identity management at the campus level, because the campus is actually ultimately important in making this thing happen. But there's also lots of other applications on campus, because lots and lots of applications, lots and lots of problems as a result. In fact, all of those applications have different passwords, and so if you don't do something to try and solve this problem at the campus level, the problems will just get worse. So different passwords, different password-based systems that are not interlinked, different password security policies, lots and lots of different attack areas, and so it makes it difficult, particularly if you want to share those services with people, your wider research community, because just provisioning accounts for guests can be a bit of a nightmare. And so the NREN community over time developed this concept of identity management. I mean, it existed at the campus because the campus had to solve their problems, and so some leading institutions around the planet, bothered to invest in this. But at the national level, wouldn't it be great if you could take the utility of a campus unified identity management system and actually make it work within your country? And so what happened is we started creating all of these identity federations. The bonus was we all, focused on the one technology, so that made it particularly useful. In fact, it wasn't entirely true. The Spanish had developed a competing technology, which thankfully they've now killed, but for a long time it existed. We predominantly supported research and education. We had the same goals, and we had similar requirements on the information that we would share. This is obviously not universally true, because other people have different naming conventions for their population, other information that might be useful in getting access to services. So this is EduGAIN. I didn't realise this slide was in this point of my... I'll see if I can scroll down. Here we go. I can see what's coming up ahead now. So we created a service called Edgenet because we had this concept of utility from Eduroam. Eduroam is always interconnected, so there is no Eduroam island, right? The Eduroam that exists in Senegal is supposed to be the same Eduroam at the University of Oxford or at the University of Southern Queensland. It's all supposed to be the same and it's all supposed to work. And so how can we do this for Wi-Fi and not do this for identity federation? Why can't that sharing happen across a border? So the idea of Edunet is people choose to contribute resources or the identities of their users into a common pool. So you contribute the identities of your users so that they can access other research services in other countries, or if you have a data set that you want to share with the academic community, you can make that available as a service. And so all of these different federations, whether they're UK Federation here in the UK, the Australian Access Federation, In Common in the US, or SurfConnext in the Netherlands, they can all contribute and exchange services. And so this is, you can't see the light grey on this map at all, I presume, but this is what the Identity Federation landscape looked like before Edunet started. So you can see that key areas on the planet bothered to invest in Identity Federation, some doing pilots, and huge swathes of the planet doing nothing. Presumably hoping that there'll be a magic solution that will come from one of these other countries and it will, well actually, it's interesting, I call it a magic solution, and the EC funded a project called MAGIC, which was actually to deploy more identity federations. This is what it looks like now. This is May 2016. The previous map was from 2012. And so we had a project to do a lot of development in Latin America. So you can see they bothered to join. They built up their identity federations and they learnt from what we were doing in Europe. Africa, largely empty still, right? We're still doing work in this space. And we have a project that's currently funded at least for another year. So we're looking for NRENs, and so we're doing the Eduroam deployment first because that's a lower barrier to entry, less technology required to get that set up. But actually what we found in some parts of Latin America, they actually weren't interested in Eduroam because that did one thing, right? They were interested in all of the services that could be available if you had identity federation, if you could exchange your identities for access to content. And we saw the map before of the number of researchers, and so they've got this long tail where you've got tiny little countries. It's sort of the equivalent for identity federation. When you're trying to convince publishers to support SAML and to participate in your federated environment, if you're the newest identity federation, on the blocks, so when Ghana starts up an identity federation, they're going to be the 62nd, highest priority for a publisher. Okay? And so all of the identity federations ahead are going to get the attention because they have the money, they have the purchasing power, they're coordinated, they're actually able to access that journal content. If you're way down at the bottom of the list, you're not there. And so what Edunet allows, and because UK Federation is such a powerful identity federation with respect to its incorporation of publishers and journal content, is that UK Federation, via UK Federation, you can say, okay, we'll exchange metadata with anyone on the planet that wants to access our content. Now, it doesn't mean that you're giving the content away for free, it's just that you're allowing the authentication to happen. The authorization may be based on having to fulfill a journal subscription. There may be a library consortium that purchases for them, or there might be, you might have a goodwill program, right, where you're willing to give access to content to Ghana for some period of time because you just think it's a nice thing to do. But at the moment, you can't do that because either the networking structure in Ghana, if you're focused heavily on IP-based authentication, you can't segregate academic users in Ghana from government institutions, from law firms, from industrial research organisations. You might want to sell your content to that sector and it's hard to differentiate users. So that's why now we see in the deployment of identity federation, new federations want to join EduGAIN very, very quickly and early. This is a more realistic architecture. So we had the nice stylized thing of people contributing resources, but actually EduGAIN is rather messy as an infrastructure. It's hidden, so you don't need to see this really, but you have all of the different models of how identity federations. Some are mesh federations where all components talk to each other, or you have some hybrid model of mesh and hub and spoke, or you have hub and spoke where all of the content is centralized through a series of proxy environments. The bonus is they all work happily together in EduGAIN in the way that we've architected it, so the users will have a consistent experience and a consistent workflow when they're interacting with your services, whether those services are directly connected to their identity federation or made available through a partner federation. So building identity federation, it has this interesting chicken and egg problem. There's actually an egg there. It doesn't look like it. It looks like I've, hacked away at a poor chicken. But when people have limited resources, and this happened when we built the identity federation in Armenia, they said, what do we focus on? Do we focus on identity providers so that our institutions can log into things? Or do we focus on services so our institutions have something to log into? Right? And you have this disparity. They actually need both. Right? And if they invest only in identity providers and they have nothing to log into, then they'll say, what is the point of this? So this really sort of drove home the point that we needed to collaboratively share services so there was some value in this campus investment. So identity provision, still the responsibility of the campus. This is the model that we think works well. The federations are at the NREN responsibility. If there is a lead institution, maybe even library consortia in some territories might run identity federations. And in fact, UK Federation here was originally started by GISC. GISC is now responsible for the whole network as well, but initially they weren't. Sometimes publishers and various content that you provide are killer apps. And people always want this killer app of why they would bother to invest in identity federation and identity management at the campus level. So sometimes your content, because it's either licensed cheaply, given away freely, is an incentive for people to invest. And actually what we're finding now is it's actually many thousands of tiny killer apps. People don't have, different institutions have different requirements, and some people want to get access to particular online content or a collaboration tool, and it's actually many small clusters of researchers rather than one very easily identifiable use case for doing work. So there's various doorways to content, and this is always, I think, a bugbear for me because IP-based authorization is still commonplace, right? It hasn't become extinct. This is not the worst thing in the world because as we're developing networks slowly in Africa, we do need African NRENs to join AFRINIC, to request IPv4 address space, start to build out their network so that they can peer with a network like GÉANT. But we don't think that IP-based authorization is a long-term and useful model, particularly since the popularity of mobile devices or users at home means that they can't get access to that content, and then you have to build more and more complex systems to try and fake users being on their campus just to solve this. So that just creates more problems, and then they're investing in infrastructure that's only solving one thing, which is getting access to journal content. We'd much prefer them to invest in infrastructure that had greater utility. So direct payment and subscription. Now I've actually seen people actually use uni credit cards to buy access to journal content that they already have access to because they just can't work out how to get access to the content through some other mechanism. And sometimes we have people say they want to do identity federation to save money, right, on their journal subscription costs. And that's not what we ever promote, right? We're trying to drive higher utilization of that journal content. We want people to be able to find the content with Google or Google Scholar, be able to log in and access that content. So in effect, that the cost per user or cost per journal article that is read by an institution is overall lower. We're not interested in driving down the cost. That's something that various library consortia, INASP, IFL, and groups like that work on. And even if you're giving the content away from free, right, there's still value in trying to get people access and using that content so that they think that the investment is worthwhile. And so, unfortunately, federated login, it's the last sort of way of accessing content, but we would much prefer if it was much higher on the list. And then I have to do down arrow. No. Resume slideshow. Yeah. And so this is EduGAIN. This is how you can talk to us if you're interested in ensuring that you as a publisher are participating in EduGAIN. If you want to know our guidelines on discovery services to try and make it easier for people to find the content that they need. We have a team of people willing to help. And while we're not directly doing work in all of these African countries that are represented at this meeting today, we're working with their NRENs, at least on Edurome, and over time that will evolve to Identity Federation work. And questions after the next presenter, if you can remember anything I said.
Thank you very much.